3 nights passed, but Prince Machias was nowhere to be seen. Casimir decided it was time to put on his hiking boots. He carried a spare change of clothes, his food, his sling, a pouch of stones, and last but not least, his new shamshir. The sword rested on his leg perfectly. Nothing about it stuck out or read as being out of place. Maybe that, more than anything, made him feel uncomfortable. He slipped on some agate stone rings, which he believed were his father's, and waited to leave. Merchant had freshly shaved, using Casimir's basin and razor. He had swapped his large bag for a smaller satchel, in which he kept the last of his inventory. Now, standing a little taller without the burden of leather and straps, he looked more of a highway robber than an honest merchant. Something about the clean jaw, too, made him look crueler and thinner than he was. He reminded Casimir of a fox. "Have you had breakfast?" asked Casimir. Merchant reached into his new satchel and procured a pack. "I have a drink you might like." As he straightened himself, his eyes passed over the shepherd's chest. It was a fleeting, cursory glance, but anyone who knew him would tell you he was owlishly observant. Merchant unfurled a pack of strong-smelling black powder. "What's that?" asked Casimir. "An Eastern decoction. They call it cave. It's bitter, worse than cow's piss, but milk helps in my experience. It can keep you up for some hours, with little need for food. I try to keep some on me at all times. All we need is hot water." Casimir began boiling water on the stove. Merchant used a small knife to scoop clumps of coffee into the pot, and stirred. The earthy scent bloomed, infused into the air. Out went the scent of onions and cheese. In came the scent of burnt toast. Casimir breathed the exotic scent in. "I feel stronger already," he said. "Must be your Saracesian blood," finished Merchant, without looking up from his stirring. "What's that smell?" called a very groggy mother. They had not heard her creeping from her room. "Cave," said Casimir. "Merchant has brought some from the east. He insists it'll make us stronger." "There's pomegranate for that," said his mother, co-conspiratorially. She pushed her way between them and breathed in to explore the foreign smells herself. "Are you sure, Merchant?" "I have a name, you know." "Sure, Merchant," said Mother. "And I have chocolate. Would you like some chocolate to go with that?" Merchant could not believe his ears. "You have chocolate? How?" "I stole it from the same woman I had hit over the head in my frying pan. She'd received it as a gift from the lady she worked for, and was gloating about it all over town." Snap. Mother broke the chocolate block into jagged shapes, and deposited them into the boiling broth. They all watched as the chocolate lost its hard, marbled texture. Casimir added a glass of milk, and soon the water was an almost appetizing milky brown. 3 cups were produced, 3 cups of chocolate coffee were imbibed. They let the magic sit on their tongues, felt the heat hit them, deep in their chests. Their bellies grew warm and pleasant. "Well," asked Merchant, "what do you think?" "Cow piss," responded Mother. "It'll never catch," agreed Casimir. "But I do like feeling strong, and it certainly packs a punch." I liked it. They all took another sip, and then said their goodbyes. Mother kissed Casimir on the head. She watched the men leave, watched them shrink the more steps they took. Soon, they were the size of boys, their shapes still observable against the massive canvas of the sky. They were walking amongst tall trees. Then, they were toddlers, and they grew smaller still. "So," asked Merchant, "how much has Prince Machias promised you?" "He hasn't actually given me a number," Casimir replied. "I see. Are you in the habit of partaking in work before you know the pay?" "No, but I'm not doing this for pay. I'm doing this because..." Casimir stopped abruptly. "Well, because... I don't know why I'm doing this." "Perhaps to earn a favour. The prince will be indebted to you. Should you demand it in open court, he will be obliged to be truthful." Merchant licked his lips. "If you had invoked the right of favour, that is." "I didn't, sadly. His brother, Mikolaj, had sprang out from some hiding spot, and the situation had escalated before I'd thought to ask. I think I'm doing this for Princess Katarzyna." Merchant nodded knowingly. "She is a fair sight. So you plan on hitting her with the right of favour?" I don't want to marry the princess. She's spoiled and unruly. I'm at a loss. I'm helping her because she's young. She doesn't know what she's sacrificing by running into Rubazal's arms. I know the stories. He'll make a bride and a mother of her, and it's not her time. Why does this concern you? Asked Merchant. I don't know. My mother has told me time and time again that I was not born of rape. She found an unlikely friend during the war, someone to help her in the darkest of times. His blood, the blood of this stranger, may be in me, or it may not. What matters is that they left. Casimir looked down to Merchant. I ran away once to spare her my presence. She's spent more than 20 summers looking after me. It was not her choice. Nonsense. She could have sold you, or taken you to the church. She could have fed you to the wolves. It's not a mother's way. The goddess Zavonia would have cursed her. That right there is the problem, though, isn't it? Zavonia would have cursed her. Not a choice. Wrong, disagreed Merchant. Still a choice. A goddess's ire is hard won and hard paid, but it can be paid. Your mother loves you, Casimir. I can see it. How could she not? You've stayed behind to help her. You're not like the heroes of old. You could have left on your odyssey. You would have come back famous for it, too. Merchant reached down and took a handful of soil. He crushed it in his palm and revealed the blue-grey centre. Instead, you've stayed your whole life in this place, where invisible rivers flood the land and leave the soil thirsty for air. He wiped his hands, and the dark soil fell back to the ground from which it came. I'm leaving her now. Maybe that's why I'm helping Princess Katarzyna. Merchant scoffed. Barely a stroll in your backyard. You've travelled but a day, Casimir. Not much in comparison to you, Casimir admitted. I'm sorry, you know. I don't know what it must be like to come home and find yourself an orphan. I didn't say I was an orphan. What? You're not an orphan. Did you lie about your mother? No, she's as dead as can be. My father, on the other hand. Your father's alive, said Casimir. Right, I guess that makes sense. What's he like? Asked Casimir. He's difficult, to say the least. Injured during the war, but he continues to work. Says he only needs 2 hands for butchering. Does he know you've come with me? Merchant shook his head. He'll be fine. Used to being alone these days. The 2 men walked for a mile or so in silence. Night was on the horizon. It was just then that they caught their first glimpse of Rubazal's forest. They took it in. In many ways, the forest under Mount Bron was like a fortress wall. It was a wall of densely packed trees that jutted out of the ground quite suddenly. The trees were tall as the cliffs that reached out into the cosmic sea like broken fingernails. The trunks were thick. Some were straight like spears, others gnarled like hands afflicted with rheumatism. All were covered in 100,000 different varieties of fungus, ranging from the smallest, deepest red to large cancerous tumours. Casimir guessed that, in a way, the forest was beautiful, in a colourful, harsh, malignant way. It was a wall of sound. They could hear the forest all the way from where they were standing. A cacophony of insects and birds, of deers and wolves and other things. Monsters, perhaps. But monsters weren't the end of it, no. There was something deeper. Merchant couldn't figure it out. What by the gods is making all of that racket? He gulped. Even the trees speak in Rubazal's forest, said Casimir. Didn't you know? We can't go in there, he said. Casimir frowned. You, the far traveller, don't want to see what's inside? I do want to see. I wanted to see many things in my travels. The trick was learning to assess risks, Casimir. That is how I'll continue to see. We can't go in there. The noise will drive us mad. It's better on the inside, the young man assured Merchant. When I went in last time, it was quieter. This is just the seepage. It's because we're on the border of Rubazal's land. The space between men and gods is always strange. You don't need to tell me that. I've seen much in the ways of magic, Casimir. Like? Asked Casimir as he sat on a nice rock and began removing food from his bag. Well, one time I was in Zhang, in a province called the 4 Points, which borders the snowiest mountain ranges between it and Avanti. Oh yeah, encouraged Casimir, who slowed right down. He took his time setting up dinner. He knew the more time we spent near the forest, the less horrible the sounds felt. He would share a meal, and by the time they were done, Merchant might even feel at home. Do tell. I enjoy stories with magic in them. I enjoy telling them. It was a strange place, a place between two countries, and it was said by my guides, Anga and Sajal, that the gods have been fighting for the land for hundreds of years. It's always cold there, in the sky and in the hills, so you can imagine my surprise when, passing through a narrow defile, Indra peeked his face through the clouds and hurled a bolt of lightning down at a shrine. The frozen valley became hot in an instant while the magic passed. The shrine was dedicated to a fox spirit. Merchant made a sound like thunder. The stone shrine was reduced to a cloud of dust, and, I swear on my mother's soul, a giant, ethereal fox came limping out of the remains, where it fell, and became a patch of white flowers. Casimir cut 2 sausages from the string, and cooked them over a fire of dung and twigs. The juice dripped into the flames, which burned a gentle blue corona. The smell of meat was strong, and the bread was dry but serviceable. Cheese, sausage, bread, an apple for after, and some small cups of a little something new. Merchant fell deeper and deeper into the role of bard. He ate and spoke at once. The ginormous Asura did not notice the 3 of us as we leapt from the rock and onto his first sleeve. He was so busy reeling from the blow that had landed upon his cheeks that we managed to slip in between his ox fur shirt and his vestments. We began to climb up along his torso, determined to ride our way out of this den of giants. It did occur to me that he might swat at us, like we do when killing gnats, but I decided not to voice my fears. Sajal was still panicking. He'd not recovered from... Casimir? Are you listening? Look over there, said Casimir. He pointed out across the valley. The oldest of all the princes and the only living of Sigismund's first brood was riding across the fields of wild grass. His hair, untied, trailed behind him like white clouds. Both rider and horse were the largest mounted man Casimir had ever seen. He looked like death had climbed onto a horse and decided to join in the festivities. All around that grim prince were some of the oldest, meanest, cruelest veterans, spurs bloody and glistening, visible all the way from where Casimir sat. It's Johann, said Merchant, only just noticing the crown prince. How? Isn't he supposed to be as old as the cathedral? Didn't Sigismund build it to mark his birth? He rides like a young man. Both men watched Johann come and go, his troop of grey-haired warriors following. Merchant shivered. They remind me of the Wild Hunt. It's not right. Men their age should not be going to war. Any sort of war, especially with family. Old men should be peaceful and sleepy. He took a bite of sausage. Meat juice gushed out and slurped onto his shoes. Shit, he cursed. Casimir turned his attention to Merchant slowly. You should speak to your father, he said. I know, replied Merchant, before stuffing the remains of the pork into his mouth and swallowing it whole. When I get back. All right, let's do it then. Lead the way. The bridge referred to as the Evil Eye was a thin, dark archway of basalt, a peculiar and precarious feat of engineering. On either side, you had stacks, rigid walls of igneous rock 15 feet or so tall. When the light was right, the reflection of the bridge produced a perfect circle of black stone. When the sun shone through it, it looked like a fiery pupil. This is not a good place. I don't know if this place is good or bad. It doesn't care for us. It might eat us the same way wild dogs do. They found him in the shade of the Evil Eye. They saw the underside of some snow-covered boots and the rumpled folds of a dark, damp cape. The figure was hunched over the water, head ostensibly submerged. That's one of Prince Machias's hussars, said Casimir, recognising the livery. How long did you say it had been since Machias passed your house? More than 3 days. Do you think they'd left him behind? Apparently so. Casimir shook his head in disapproval. I told them not to drink the water. You knew it had addictive properties? Not at all. I only knew my mother told me not to, and so I didn't. We need to burn it. That's what they did in Avanti Kush. They burned their bodies so that wayward spirits wouldn't use them as hosts. Sadly, we have no time. It's not ideal, but very well. For a moment, none spoke. The merchant stepped over the corpse, and he instinctively reached for the pendant he kept under his shirt. Utan, guide this lost spirit on. Matka, accept this one into the bowels of your domain. He stepped onto the basalt arch. Then he stopped. This is the warmest thing since our campfire, he observed. I can feel the heat sinking into my toes. It feels like... He shook his head and continued walking.